Hey everyone, and welcome back to Talk Tickers. You know us. Usually we're all about dissecting those earnings calls. But today, we're going to kind of put those spreadsheets aside for a bit and dive into some breaking news.
Yeah, definitely big news.
That has the whole biopharma world buzzing.
It's a big one.
Yeah, we're talking about a potential game changer.
Absolutely.
In the world of schizophrenia treatment.
Yeah.
So Bristol Myers Squibb's CEO just unveiled their latest innovation. And it's a new drug called Cobain Fy.
Cobain Fy.
And this isn't just your, typical Me Too drug.
No.
This is the first FDA-approved drug in its class for treating schizophrenia.
Huge.
Working in a completely different way than any other medication currently available.
Big deal, yeah. And I think everyone's talking about this because it really has the potential to change the treatment landscape for schizophrenia, right? If you think about it, schizophrenia is a complex condition, often debilitating. It affects millions of people worldwide. And current treatments, while helpful for some, often leave patients grappling with really frustrating side effects or limited efficacy.
And that's where Cobain Fy comes in, right? It's specifically designed to target a different pathway in the brain.
Yeah, and what's really cool is that this new approach is showing a lot of promise in those early studies.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because unlike the traditional antipsychotics that really just focus on blocking those dopamine receptors, Cobain Fy works by actually activating a specific type of receptor called a cholinergic receptor.
Interesting.
So it's a completely different approach, and the early data suggests that it could be a real game changer for patients who haven't really had much success with those traditional therapies.
Yeah, we're already seeing really positive signs,
Yeah.
Prescriptions for Cobain Fy are exceeding initial expectations.
That's great.
And what's really encouraging is the feedback we're getting from doctors who are actually using it with their patients.
Yeah, what are they saying?
I mean, they're reporting some pretty remarkable results.
It's still early days, of course, but the initial response has been incredibly positive.
Yeah.
Doctors are excited about its potential to help patients who have really just struggled to find relief with those existing treatments.
So here's where it gets even more interesting, right?
Okay.
The potential of Cobain Fy extends beyond just schizophrenia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This drug might have applications for a whole range of other conditions.
Like what?
Including Alzheimer's disease, bipolar disorder, and even autism spectrum disorder.
I know, right? It's almost like this one drug could potentially unlock treatments for multiple conditions. So, of course, more research is needed.
Of course.
But the possibilities are pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And this is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Bristol Myers Squibb has been quietly building this powerhouse pipeline of promising therapies.
Yes.
And this is all part of a larger strategy to position themselves for long-term growth.
So let's talk about that broader strategy, right? Because BMS isn't just about developing blockbuster drugs.
Right.
They're laser focused on operational excellence and strategic investments to really solidify their position as a leader in the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely. Playing the long game.
So playing the long game.
They've been investing heavily in research and development, and that investment is clearly paying off.
Big time.
They have a very robust pipeline of late-stage assets.
That's right.
Which means that these drugs are further along in the development process and closer to that potential approval.
So for those of you who might not be familiar with the ins and outs of drug development, late-stage assets are kind of like the all-star team.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Of a pharmaceutical company's pipeline.
Exactly.
These are the drugs that have shown promising results in those earlier clinical trials, and now they're in those final stages of testing before they can be submitted for FDA approval.
So having a strong pipeline of those late-stage assets is a really good indicator of a company's future potential for growth.
Yes.
And BMS is firing on all cylinders in this department.
Absolutely. And they're not just throwing money at research.
Right.
They're being very strategic about it.
Absolutely.
So they're acquiring these promising startups, licensing these innovative technologies, and forging partnerships that give them access to the best research and development.
It's like they're building this network of innovation.
Yeah.
Tapping into the brightest minds and the most promising technologies out there.
Absolutely. It's all about optimizing every single step of the process.
Exactly.
They're streamlining the research, making manufacturing more efficient, and basically making sure that every aspect of their operation is running at peak performance.
It's like fine-tuning a high-performance engine.
Yeah.
Not just looking at the individual parts.
Right.
but at how they all work together seamlessly to achieve that peak performance.
And this operational excellence goes hand in hand with their commitment to sustainability.
That's right.
They're not just chasing profits, right?
No.
They're trying to do it in a way that's responsible and sustainable.
Yeah.
They've made some really impressive commitments.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of reducing their environmental impact, promoting diversity and inclusion, and upholding high ethical standards.
It's clear they understand that their success is really intertwined with the well-being of the planet and the communities they operate in. They're really trying to create a positive impact.
Yeah.
Which is something I think is becoming increasingly important for investors to consider these days.
For sure. Investors are paying more attention to these ESG factors now than ever before.
Yeah.
So it's a smart move for companies like BMS to prioritize those initiatives. And all of this points to a company that's really serious about creating long-term value.
Absolutely.
They're making those smart investments, they're optimizing their operations, they're committed to sustainability, and they have a pipeline that's just bursting with potential.
It's a really compelling story, and it's definitely piqued my interest as an investor.
So let's get into some of the other exciting drugs they have in the pipeline.
Okay.
Because Cobain Fy is just the tip of the iceberg.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, so they have this drug, Millvexian.
Millvexian.
Which is a next-generation anticoagulant designed to prevent blood clots.
Interesting. So before we get too deep into the science of all of it, can you explain why a new anticoagulant is such a big deal? We already have a bunch of those on the market, right?
Right.
You're right. We do have those existing anticoagulants, but they often come with some significant side effects.
Yeah.
And the biggest one is that risk of bleeding.
Okay.
Millvexian is designed to be more effective at preventing those clots, and it has a significantly lower risk of bleeding compared to current treatments.
So that's a huge deal, especially for patients with conditions like stroke or heart attack, where preventing those blood clots is crucial.
Yeah, absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
And the market for these anticoagulants is massive.
Yeah.
We're talking billions of dollars.
Billions.
And it's only going to grow as the population ages.
Right.
So if Millvexian lives up to its potential, it could be a massive revenue generator for BMS.
And they have another potential blockbuster in the works.
Oh, there's more.
Called Ed Millparen?
Ed Millparen.
And this one's targeting pulmonary fibrosis.
Okay.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with this condition, it's basically scarring of the lungs.
Yeah.
And it can be really debilitating.
It's a serious condition with limited treatment options.
Yeah.
And there's just a huge unmet need for effective therapies out there.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about Ed Millparen is that it's shown some promising results in clinical trials so far.
Oh, that's great.
Suggesting that it could be more effective than those existing treatments and also has a better safety profile.
So potentially game changer for patients with pulmonary fibrosis.
Right.
And yet another example of how BMS is targeting these areas where there's a real need for new and innovative therapies.
Exactly. And these two drugs, Millvexian and Ed Millparen, are just a glimpse into the depth and breadth of BMS's pipeline.
It's huge. They have over 10 new molecular entities.
Wow.
Which are essentially brand new drugs.
Yeah.
And over 30 major life cycle management indications.
Wow.
In development.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of potential for growth.
So it's clear they're taking this portfolio approach to drug development, spreading their bets across these diverse range of therapeutic areas and stages of development, which makes them less reliant on the success of any one single drug.
It's a smart strategy.
Very smart.
And it's clearly paying off.
Yeah.
So they're not just developing drugs, they're building a sustainable business that's really built to thrive in the long run.
They're thinking about the next decade, not just the next quarter.
Exactly.
Which is refreshing to see in an industry that often focuses on those short-term gains. They are building a company that's not just financially strong, but ethically sound and committed to making a positive impact on the world.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty rosy picture of BMS so far.
Yeah.
But let's play devil's advocate for a minute.
Okay.
What are some of the potential weaknesses or risks that investors should be aware of?
Well, even with all the positives, there are always those risks involved in the pharmaceutical industry.
Of course.
I mean, for example, those clinical trials could fail.
Right.
Unexpected side effects could emerge. Competitors could develop rival drugs.
Sure.
There's always the risk of regulatory hurdles or even just changes in healthcare policy that could impact their profitability.
So even though BMS looks really strong right now, it's important for investors to understand that there are no guarantees in this industry.
Exactly. It's a high-risk, high-reward game.
Which makes it all the more exciting. All right, so I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
Yeah,
We've talked about Cobain Fy, this groundbreaking new drug for schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
We've explored BMS's impressive pipeline of potential blockbusters.
Yeah.
And we've touched on their strategic investments and their commitment to operational excellence.
It's been fascinating.
So stay tuned for the second part of our deep dive, where we're going to delve a little bit deeper into BMS's financial strength, their commitment to returning capital to shareholders.
Looking forward to it.
And their vision for the future of neuroscience.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk Tickers. You know, when we look at a company like Bristol Myers Squibb, it's easy to get caught up in all the excitement of a groundbreaking new drug like Cobain Fy.
Sure.
But it's important to remember this is just one piece of a much larger story.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about their robust pipeline and their strategic investments, but let's zoom in on their financial strength.
Right.
Because that's really the foundation that allows them to pursue these really ambitious goals.
Absolutely. BMS is in a very solid financial position right now.
They have a strong balance sheet. They're committed to managing their debt. And they generate significant cash flow from their existing portfolio of products.
So they're not just relying on future blockbusters to fuel their growth. They have a really solid base to work with.
They've been very disciplined about managing their finances, and that gives them a lot of flexibility to invest in R&D, pursue strategic acquisitions, and return capital to shareholders.
Which is something that investors always appreciate.
Always.
So can you talk a little bit about their track record of returning capital to shareholders? What's their approach to dividends and share buybacks?
They have a really solid track record in this area. They've consistently paid dividends for years. And they've also been actively buying back their own shares, which can boost those earnings per share and increase the value of those existing shares.
It's like they're sharing their success with their investors.
Exactly.
Which is always a good sign. Yeah, it shows that they're not just focused on growing the business. They're focused on creating value for their shareholders.
And this brings us back to their overarching strategy, which is focused on achieving sustained top-tier growth. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? What does that mean in practice?
It means they're not just aiming for a one-time burst of growth. They're building a business that can consistently deliver strong performance over the long haul. And they're doing this through a combination of innovative medicines, operational excellence, and strategic capital allocation.
We've talked about the first two, but let's dive a little deeper into that last one, strategic capital allocation.
Okay.
What does that look like for BMS?
It means they're being very thoughtful about how they deploy their financial resources. They're investing in R&D, of course. But they're also looking for opportunities to expand into new markets, acquire promising technologies, and form the strategic partnerships.
So they're not just throwing money at every opportunity that comes their way. They're being really selective and strategic about where they invest their capital.
Exactly. They have a clear vision for the future, and they're allocating those resources in a way that supports that vision.
It's like they're playing chess, not checkers.
That's a great analogy.
And speaking of vision, they've also been making some really interesting moves in the field of neuroscience. You mentioned earlier that Cobain Fy might have applications beyond schizophrenia. So what's their broader strategy in this area?
Well, as you know, neuroscience has traditionally been a very challenging area for drug development.
It has.
It's incredibly complex. And there's a high rate of failure in those clinical trials. But the potential rewards are huge because we're talking about treatments for some of the most debilitating conditions affecting humanity.
Like Alzheimer's?
Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, just to name a few.
Huge disease.
And despite all those challenges, BMS seems determined to make a mark in this field.
Yeah, they do.
They're not shying away from the complexity or the risk.
It's actually quite bold.
It is.
When you think about it.
They see that potential of neuroscience, and they're willing to invest the time and resources necessary to unlock that potential. They're not just dipping their toes in the water. They're diving in head first.
Which makes sense when you consider the potential impact. If they can develop effective treatments for these devastating neurological conditions, it would be a game changer, not just for patients, but for the entire healthcare system.
Exactly. It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can pull it off, the rewards would be enormous.
Yeah.
And they're not just betting on one drug or one approach. They're exploring multiple avenues of research and development.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're diversifying their bets within neuroscience, which is a smart approach considering the inherent uncertainties of this field.
They're casting a wide net looking for those promising leads and innovative technologies that could lead to breakthroughs in the treatment of these neurological conditions.
Yeah. It's an exciting time to be following BMS in this space.
It is.
We're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in neuroscience.
They're not just developing drugs.
Right.
They're trying to advance our understanding of the brain and how it works.
Yeah.
And that's something that could have far-reaching implications beyond just drug development.
Right.
It could lead to new insights into how we think, how we learn, and how we experience the world around us.
That's a really interesting point. It's like they're not just trying to treat diseases. They're trying to unlock the secrets of the human brain.
It's a pretty ambitious goal.
It is.
But BMS seems to be up for the challenge.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've talked about BMS's financial strength, their commitment to returning capital to shareholders,
Yeah.
their multifaceted approach to drug development, and their bold vision for the future of neuroscience.
They're a company that's firing on all cylinders, and they're definitely one to watch in the coming years.
All right, before we wrap up, let's have a little fun
Okay.
and indulge in some speculation.
I like where this is going.
Let's put on our trader hats for a minute.
All right, let's do it.
What if we imagine a scenario where everything goes right for BMS?
Okay.
Cobain Fy becomes a blockbuster. Millvexian and Ed Millparen dominate their respective markets.
Okay.
And their neuroscience bets pay off big time.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Paint me a picture. What does that look like for investors?
In that scenario, we could be looking at a company that's not just growing, but exploding in value.
Right?
We could be talking about a potential 10-bagger.
Wow.
A stock that could multiply in value 10 times over within the next decade.
A 10-bagger?
Yeah.
That's a pretty bold prediction.
It is.
Yeah.
And of course, there are risks involved. There are no guarantees in the pharmaceutical industry.
Of course.
But if everything aligns perfectly for BMS,
yeah,
the upside potential is absolutely massive.
All right, so let's say we're feeling bullish on BMS and we want to position ourselves for this potential growth. What's the play? How do we get in on the action?
Well, before we get into any specific strategies, I have to remind everyone that this is not financial advice.
Of course.
We're just having a hypothetical conversation here.
Right.
Always do your own research and consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions.
Absolutely. This is purely for entertainment purposes.
Right.
But let's say, hypothetically speaking, that we want to ride this potential wave of growth.
Yeah.
What are some options?
Well, the simplest approach would be to buy shares of BMS stock and hold on for the long term.
The classic buy and hold strategy.
Yeah.
If BMS continues to execute on its plan, this could be a very rewarding approach.
Exactly. But for those who are feeling a bit more adventurous
Yeah.
and have a higher risk tolerance, there are other more aggressive strategies.
Like options.
Yes, options could potentially offer a way to amplify your returns if BMS stock price goes up significantly.
But of course, options come with their own set of risks.
Right.
They can be complex and volatile, and you could potentially lose your entire investment.
So it's not for the faint of heart, and it's definitely not something you should jump into without doing your research and understanding the risks involved.
Right. Options trading is not for everyone.
Right.
But for those who are comfortable with higher risk and have a good understanding of how options work, it could be a way to potentially supercharge their returns.
So we've explored a couple hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the future is uncertain.
Right.
No one can predict with certainty what will happen to BMS's stock price.
Absolutely. But one thing is clear, they're a company that's worth watching.
Yes.
They're making bold moves.
Yep.
They have a robust pipeline of those potential blockbusters.
For sure.
They're committed to that long-term growth and sustainability.
Yeah.
And they're led by a CEO who has a very clear vision for the future.
It's a compelling story, and we'll be watching closely to see what they do next.
Absolutely.
All right, stay tuned for the third and final part of our deep dive into Bristol Myers Squibb,
Okay.
where we'll explore their commitment to a new chapter in neuroscience and what it could mean for investors.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Talk Tickers. We spent this whole episode talking about Bristol Myers Squibb, and I gotta say, I'm impressed.
Yeah, for sure.
They're firing on all cylinders, right?
Absolutely.
Strong financials, they got that robust pipeline, and they're committed to sustainability. But one thing I'm really interested in is their focus on neuroscience.
Yeah.
Which is a field that has been challenging.
Neuroscience, yeah, it really has a reputation for being, high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The brain is like the most complex organ in the human body.
Yeah.
And we're just scratching the surface of understanding how it all works.
Yeah. It's like trying to map the stars in the universe.
Right.
There's just so much we don't know.
Exactly.
And that makes developing treatments incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's a challenge. But BMS seems determined to, crack the code.
Yeah, they do.
They're investing a ton in neuroscience research, and they're not afraid to take those risks.
No, they're not.
They see the potential to make a real difference in the lives of millions of people who are suffering from these debilitating neurological conditions.
Mm-hmm. And remember we talked about how Cobain Fy, their new drug for schizophrenia, might also have applications for Alzheimer's, bipolar disorder, and even autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah, and those are just a few examples, right? They're exploring a whole range of those neurological and psychiatric conditions, really looking for new ways to understand and treat those complex disorders.
What I think is fascinating about their approach is they're not just focused on developing new drugs. They're investing in research to better understand the underlying mechanisms of these diseases.
Yeah, going deeper.
Which could lead to entirely new approaches to treatment.
It's like they're laying the groundwork for a whole new era of neuroscience.
Yeah.
One that's based on a much deeper understanding of how the brain works.
Yeah.
And how we can harness its power to actually heal.
And they're doing this at a time when the need for new and effective treatments for neurological conditions is greater than ever.
Right. I mean, the population is aging.
Yeah.
And the incidence of these diseases is on the rise.
It's a global health challenge. And BMS is stepping up to the plate, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're taking a leadership role in finding those solutions.
It's pretty impressive.
It is. It's like they're not just a pharmaceutical company. They're a force for innovation and progress in neuroscience.
I think that's a really good point.
And that's something that investors should be paying attention to.
Yeah, for sure.
Because the potential for growth in the neuroscience market is enormous. And BMS is well positioned to capitalize on that growth.
They have the expertise, the resources, and that long-term vision.
And they're not afraid to think big.
It's a compelling story, and I'm really excited to see what they accomplish in the next few years.
Me too. All right. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Bristol Myers Squibb.
It's been fun.
We covered a lot of ground today, from that groundbreaking drug for schizophrenia to their bold vision for the future of neuroscience.
We did.
Before we sign off, I got to remind everyone, this is not financial advice.
Of course not.
We're just two podcasters sharing our insights and our enthusiasm for the world of biopharma.
That's right. Always do your own research and talk to a financial advisor before making any investment decision.
Whatever you decide to do, we encourage you to keep an eye on Bristol Myers Squibb.
Definitely a company to watch.
They're a company that's pushing those boundaries of science and working to really improve the lives of millions of people around the world.
It's a mission worth supporting.
It is. Thanks for joining us on Talk Tickers.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of earnings calls.